Hey, good evening, all. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for joining me, Dorothea, on Through an Orthodox Christian Lens. It is August 12th, 2025. I have a story here that I thought is a good one to share with you. As it says in the title, we're going to go right to the article. Russia is a warring country, Trump says. Moscow has been fighting wars for centuries. The U.S. president has said. U.S. President Donald Trump has described Russia as a warring country, saying Moscow has been engaged in conflicts for centuries and just keeps on fighting. Trump made the remarks on Monday at a press conference where he talked about his upcoming meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in the U.S. state of Alaska to discuss a possible settlement of the Ukraine conflict. Russia is a warring nation. That's what they do. They fight a lot of wars, he said. Oh my gosh, he speaks like he's in grade school. A friend of mine said, Russia is tough because they just keep on fighting, Trump added. They beat Hitler, so did we, and they beat Napoleon. You know, they've been doing this for a long time. You know, when he talks at first, it sounds very offensive. But in that last paragraph, it sounded like he's giving some credit to Russia. So Trump was referring to two of Russia's military triumphs, the defeat of Napoleon's Grand Army two centuries ago and the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. The two European dictators, Napoleon Bonaparte and Adolf Hitler, sent their armies into Russia in 1812 and 1941 respectively, only to suffer crushing defeat. So maybe he was trying to be nice, but saying it's a warring country just sounds very terrible. Yeah, they just keep on fighting. Is he trying to say, Russia's not going to stop fighting in Ukraine and that they're going to ultimately prevail, which they already have? I just thought this was interesting. So, I thought, okay, let's go see how many wars Russia has been in. Wars fought by Russia. Russia's military history spans over a millennium, involving numerous conflicts driven by its geography, demography, and strategic ambitions. The nation has fought major wars against powerful adversaries, including the Great Northern War, the Napoleonic Wars, World War I, and World War II, often leveraging its vast territory, harsh climate, and large population to overcome invasions. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Russia's involvement extended to the Soviet-Afghan War, the Chechen Wars, the Russo-Georgian War of 2008, and the ongoing war in Ukraine, which began in 2022 and has been described as Russia's first major conventional war since World War II. Remember that. Let's see. And then it goes through all the ones we just talked about. Now, let's talk about, of course, during the Soviet time, there was some invasions going on with the Soviets because when the Soviets were in charge, it was worse in getting into other people's countries. Totally. USSR, that's how they were. Okay, so let's go to how many invaded. So there was the Mongol invasion. The Mongol Empire, led by Batu Khan, invaded and conquered much of Kiev and Rus in the late 2030s and early 2040s, establishing the Golden Horde, which ruled for nearly 250 years. The Mongol invasion led to the construction of defensive stone castles across Russia, many of which still stand today. Napoleon's invasion, as we mentioned, he led a massive invasion force across the Niemen River into Russia in June 1812, aiming to force Tsar Alexander I to comply with the continental system. After capturing Moscow, the French army was forced into a disastrous retreat due to supply shortages, harsh winter conditions, and Russian guerrilla tactics, resulting in the loss of over 380,000 troops. Wow. Then, of course, there's the German invasion. Operation Barbarossa, launched by Nazi Germany on June 22, 1941, was the largest invasion force in European history, involving nearly 4 million troops. The invasion was ultimately repelled by Soviet forces after brutal battles, including the pivotal Battle of Stalingrad, culminating in the Red Army capturing Berlin in May 1945. see, not classified full-scale invasions of Russia's core territory. So the Crimean and the Russo-Japanese. Anyway, as you can see, this is from the History Is Now magazine, Tufts University Education. Let's see. So let's go to what kind of wars have America been in? The U.S. is presently involved in 15 shadowy wars. Now let's go with the ones, the regular ones here. The War of Independence, the War of 1812, Mexican-American War, Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, Persian Gulf War, Afghanistan War, Iraq War, other conflicts, Indian War, and Civil War. Okay? That's all the ones that the U.S. has done. And that's not counting all of their regime change ones. So let's go into... the U.S. is presently involved in 15 shadowy wars. This is from July 2023, and this is just the North Dakota TV channels. For some reason, was doing this. Okay. The ever-expanding American military footprint covers nearly every continent. While the United States has long had a military presence in other nations, the scope significantly expanded following the passage of the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, which in the wake of 9/11 permitted the support of foreign forces against various terrorist groups. Yes, well, we all know it was all about getting into where we wanted to. The U.S. has since had 173,000 troops deployed in 159 countries as of 2020 and currently maintains at least 750 foreign military bases across 80 countries, according to the Conflict Management and Peace Science Journal. As the top military power in the world, according to the Global Firepower Index, the U.S. has a vested interest in the national security of countries across the globe. Sure they do. In situations that do not warrant combative military intervention or would threaten relations with allies, the government may oversee or aid more minor disputes within countries, such as counterterrorism efforts. I read up on that earlier, a few months ago, in parts of Africa. And the report was basically saying most of those were not really counterterrorism, they were counterinsurgency, and they were local issues. And it had, it was about, we're fighting terrorism. And I read that article, and it said they were doing counterterrorism, working with these groups in these particular African countries, their governments and all that. But what was interesting was it was really counterinsurgency, which basically, like, a few of the terrorist groups were not there was no danger of them attacking the United States or even leaving their country to try. They're only interested in their own local issues. But there's our special ops soldiers over there, involved in things we shouldn't be involved in. And the article did stress a concern that it could make enemies of these people that really don't care about U.S. or have anything to do with them, and then it could make things worse, which is kind of how things happen with us with Al-Qaeda, and it's not a good idea. Now, with that information, they're talking about these shadow wars in the 15 listed. So there's a shadow one in Yemen. The U.S. has supported the Yemen government against terrorist organizations, including the Islamic State or ISIS and Al-Qaeda, since the country's civil war began in 2014. Well, we all know they were giving weapons to Saudi Arabia for so many years when they were pummeling Yemen, the poorest country in that area, in the region. And, it was terrible. But Yemen still didn't give up. They still did well. I don't know anything about them supporting Yemen. I haven't heard that. And yeah, of course, they bring up the whole thing with providing military assistance to Ukraine. Then you have the Syria thing. Um, the U.S. has engaged in efforts to destabilize terrorist groups in Syria, including deploying. Well, no, don't you remember Trump said why we were there? He in his first term, he just always manages to he would always manage to blurt out things that, like, the deep state, the CIA, and Intel and military industrial complex didn't really want him to say, like, oh, we're there for the oil. We were in Syria for the oil. I don't know if you remember that, but it was on video. It was it was in the middle of a interview with Laura Ingraham interviewing him on Vox, and he said that, and she's like, well, I'm sure there's other reasons. Says, no, we're just there to protect and have the oil. So a lot of these things, it's not what they're saying. Cameroon is one of 11 African nations with which the U.S. is engaged in military activity under Operation Juniper Shield and military operations supporting the global war on terror. Yes, see, they're still doing this global war on terror, supposedly. The campaign targets terrorist organizations. Yes, that's the one that I had read up on. It's we need to get out of all these places, because us being in these places is instigating groups and making them hate us. Okay, I know people say that and they're, oh, well, you're just, no. If I was in a country and some foreign country's military was running around my country, I wouldn't want that either. Of course, Iraq, Egypt. The U.S. has maintained a military presence in Egypt since 1978 to enforce the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty. Sure. Yeah, that's going really well. They haven't done anything. Kenya, as you know, that's another one that they're in there. The supposed terrorist things that it's the same thing I told you. There was a whole report on that. It's not a good thing. Lebanon, the same thing. You know, it's oh man. Okay, so Lebanon-based terrorist organizations. ISIS, yeah, well, ISIS is not Lebanon-based. ISIS is not from Lebanon. Hezbollah is not a terrorist group, in my opinion, and neither is Hamas. They're both resistance groups that, let me explain something. These people that they call everything terrorists, except the people that are actually doing terrorism. Yeah, ISIS is a problem, chopping people's heads off and doing all this horrible things. Hamas, Hezbollah, but Hamas, the situation we're in right now, to me, and it's just the way I see it, is, and actually Larry Johnson said the same thing yesterday, and I thought, oh, there it is, exactly what I think. He said that Hamas is akin to Native Americans, Indians, when we came over, and we committed genocide against the Native Americans, many different tribes. And, we acted like it wasn't a big deal, or it was over time, but after we killed them and treated them like they were inferior, then we ended up putting them in reservations where they had to stay there, and they would move these Native Americans out of where they knew how to live and the soil they knew how to grow their crops. They put them in bad areas, not good soil, and just told them what crops to grow. And they didn't know how to grow those crops, and that wasn't something they usually ate. So, again, I love when our country talks about people who have been in other wars. And we have all of these things in our history, okay? And there's one other one I must point out. It's these are the I don't know what you would call them, but they're interventions, okay? All the ones that happened in South America. CIA in South America. Yeah. Does anybody really know this at all? So let's go into this, fueled by the Cold War and transnational corporate interests, the U.S. has covertly tinkered with the governments of Latin American countries since World War II, producing an extremely violent and unstable political climate. Yes, I feel sorry for all those people there in South America. This history gives context, okay, of the growing anti-Americanism in Latin America. Gee, I wonder why. Analysis. A timeline of U.S. intervention in Latin America. Guatemala, 1954. A CIA-organized coup overthrew the democratically elected and progressive government of Jacobo Arbenz. The U.S. justified its involvement by claiming that Soviets had an uncomfortable amount of influence over Guatemala, even though the two countries didn't even maintain diplomatic relations. The real reason for U.S. involvement came from pressure from the United Fruit Company, whose land was expropriated by Arbenz's progressive land reform. The CIA action took a form that became the mold by CIA intervention in Latin America, the bribery of military officers, and a propaganda campaign against the leftist government that included the resurrection of oppositional radio stations, the mass distribution of anti-government leaflets, and the anonymous submission of articles to newspapers painting the Arbenz government as communist. The U.S. also used international political clout to pressure the UN to ignore Arbenz's request for an investigation of the incident. The coup was followed by a 40-year period of instability and brutality in Guatemala. British Guiana, currently Guyana, I didn't know that, 1953 to 64. CIA and British intelligence funded anti-communist unions in order to strengthen opposition to democratically elected Dr. Chedé Jagan. When this failed, the Churchill government simply removed him from office due to his socialist leanings. In 1957, Jagan was re-elected, and in response, the U.S. Informative Service launched an anti-communist, anti-Jagan media campaign. Despite this, Jagan was re-elected again in 1961, which moved the British government to organize strikes in the unions that they had previously funded. The British government used these strikes as a sign of incompetence on the part of Jagan and changed the Constitution to remove him from power. Yeah, how many times was Jagan, I didn't even know this, how many times was Jagan re-elected? So obviously those people wanted that man in, but no, British government couldn't allow that. Cuba, 1959 to the present. After the Cuban Revolution in 1959, the U.S. did everything in its power to prevent its government from succeeding. The U.S. performed air raids and even mobilized Cuban exiles to attack Cuba in the infamous CIA-orchestrated Bay of the Pigs. The U.S. also enacted trade and credit embargoes, sabotaged goods destined for Cuba, made multiple assassination attempts on Castro, his brother Raul, and Che Guevara. Ecuador, 1960 to 63. The CIA infiltrated the Ecuadorian government, set up news agencies and radio stations, bombed right-wing agencies and churches, and blamed the left, all to force democratically elected Velasco Ibarra from office. When his replacement, Carlos Arosemara, refused to break relations with Cuba, the CIA-funded military took over the country, outlawed communism, and canceled the 1964 elections. Yeah, you see, they were bombing churches. The CIA doesn't give a crud about churches. You know that. Brazil, 1961 to 64. After democratically elected Genio da Silva Quadros of the Brazilian Labor Party resigned, citing military and U.S. pressure. As the reasons, his successor, João Goulart, was overthrown by a U.S.-supported military coup in 1964. Critics argue that this is because Goulart promoted social and economic reforms limited the profits of multinationals, nationalized a subsidiary of U.S.-owned International Telephone and Telegraph, and refused to break relations with Cuba and other socialist countries. He was replaced by 2 decades of a brutal military regime. There would not be another Labour Party president until the election of Lula da Silva in 2002. Those poor people in Brazil. Peru. Mid-1960s, the CIA set up military training camps and provided arms to the Peruvian government to combat guerrilla forces. Dominican Republic, 1963-65 and 63, Juan Bosch took office as the first democratically elected president of the Dominican Republic since 1924. He was a true liberal and called for land reform, low rent housing, modest nationalization of business, and restrictions on foreign investment. 7 months after being elected, the U.S. allowed a right-wing military coup to take over the government. 19 months later, a popular revolution broke out, which attempted to reinstate Bosch. The U.S. reacted by sending in troops to stop the Bosch revolutionaries. Meanwhile, the CIA and U.S. Information Agency conducted an intensive propaganda campaign against Bosch. U.S. troops stayed in the Dominican Republic until September 1966, when, thanks in part to the anti-Bosch media campaign, Juan Bosch lost the election to Joaquin Balaguer. Uruguay, 1964 to 1970. CIA and the Agency of International Development. This sounds like USAID, you know. The USAID thing and all that. Oh my gosh. Set up the Office of Public Safety. Mission in Montevideo. I don't know how that's Montevideo. I don't know. To train police in the art of torture in order to suppress rebel activity. The torture and killing was mainly directed at the Tupamaros, guerrillas who embarrassed public officials and exposed corporate corruption. Now that Tabar Vazquez, Uruguay's new left-leaning president, is in office, many who were once Tupamaro guerrillas are now holding positions in government. This roster includes Architecture Minister Jose Pepe Mujica and Federal Deputy Luis Rosadillo, who previously spent 9 years in prison for his guerrilla activity. Chile, you know that one, after the CIA unsuccessfully prevented Salvador Allende from winning the Chilean presidency by spreading propaganda and funding the opposition, it concentrated its efforts on getting Allende overthrown. So they eventually, of course, they get them out, involved bribing officers and spreading misinformation. Eventually successful and brutal dictator General Augusto Pinochet overthrew Allende in 1973. So we always put in these horrible people. Oh my gosh. Bolivia, look, this goes on and on. Argentina, Nicaragua. I mean, some of this stuff is just absolutely horrific. If you've read any of these things, death squads that are special ops troop backed in some of these places, it was just absolutely horrible. Now, look at this in Bolivia. In January 2006, as Evo Morales was sworn in as Bolivia's first indigenous president. He predicted a future of indigenous rule, saying, "We are here to say enough of the 500 years of Indian resistance. From 500 years of the resistance, we passed to another 500 years in power." Later that year, Morales sent Bolivian troops to occupy 56 gas installations and demanded all foreign energy firms sign new contracts giving Bolivia majority ownership and as much as 82% of revenues, which they did. The Argentina one. You know, I could go on. The dirty wars, the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, overthrew the Somoza dictatorship in 1979. The U.S. was frightened by what they thought could be another Cuba. President Jimmy Carter tried to sabotage the revolution through economic and diplomatic forums, and later Reagan used violence. For 8 years, Nicaragua faced military attacks by the U.S.-funded Contras, Reagan's freedom fighters, quote unquote. In 1990, the U.S. interfered in national elections, and the Sandinistas were defeated. So, again, we need to get over this thing that we feel like we have to interfere in other people's countries, other people's elections. That's up to their people who are in office, no matter if they're dictators or not. That's not we should not be doing these things. It's evil and it's wrong. As you can see, this is a hot subject for me. I get very worked up on certain things. So anyway, we go through the history of Russia's wars. We go through the histories of America's wars. You see who has the most wars, who's the real warring country. It's just done so quote unquote silently behind, in the shadows. And then some not in the shadows. But Trump is, he's saying, well, they just keep on fighting. And maybe he was trying to be somewhat complimentary about the defeats that Russia did to Napoleon's army and to the Nazis, Hitler's army. Hitler's army. I don't know. But I just wanted to share that because I found it was interesting information. And by the way, what I was saying about Hamas being like the Indians, as Larry Johnson had said, is because I grew up in a very conservative family, and my dad was in the military for 30 years. Okay, he was a judge, he was a lawyer, but I grew up with words like the Indians were savages, they weren't civilized. The way they killed people was savagery. It was terrible because they used bow and arrows and they tore up people's bodies and cut out things and things like that. Even though it was probably part of their religious beliefs and traditions and customs, we found that horrid. Okay, scalping and all that. Oh, it's terrible. And yeah, it sounds terrible. But that's their only way of fighting back against being killed and being extinguished from the land. Either that or rounded up into some small land that they can't grow any crops on, that they're not really familiar with, and they're stuck there. I think it's the same thing with the Palestinians. And I know I'm going to get a lot of people who disagree with me and think, oh, you're this lover of terrorists. No, I'm not. I look at things in a gray lens and through my Orthodox lens, that I see people. I don't just see cardboard cutouts or labels and things like that. And when you know the history, you know it's not that black and white. So, I think it was what I was going to say about that. Okay, I think that was it. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for following my channel. I do have some strong opinions on things, and some people might not like it, but, I'm an honest person. I have to share with what I believe and what I think is going on. Anyway, I hope you're having a great day, morning, evening, and again, thanks so much for watching, and until next time.